Hello and welcome to another episode of Finding Mr. Hyde, the podcast. I'm your host, Allie Jackson, and I am bringing you my positive and practical approach to dating, relationships, and a whole lot else about life, brought for you from my lived experience. Hello. I am yet again not in New York. I am traveling to Adult Volleyball Nationals, which I've been going to now, I realized, for 14 years, not consecutively. We skipped a couple during COVID years. But that's just wild to me. It's so more to come on this as I fully reflect, but the fact that I'm here doing my childhood hobby that I loved so much when I was 14, and I'm years and years, God, oh my God, 20 years, 25 years later, Jesus, I'm still doing it and it still brings me so much joy. It truly blows my mind. But that is not why we are here today. Today's guest is Sarah Vacchiano. She has her debut novel out, which I absolutely loved. It is fiction, but it is based on her real life. It's called Soft Launch. Long story short, she got married at 21 and then decided to go to law school and realized that she had completely outgrown the life that she thought she wanted, and got divorced at 27, moved to New York City, had this experience of being nearly 30 and feeling like a fish out of water, and like she was experiencing so much for the first time that a lot of people had experienced a decade before her. Her words are good on paper, emotionally a mess. And what I love about her story is that, one, it's not a clean arc. She talks really honestly about the struggles that she had and the barriers that she faced within herself to be able to go on this journey, the guilt of leaving somebody who didn't do anything wrong, who again was good on paper, and about what it looks like to build this identity for herself from scratch. I say often that no decision is irreversible, very few at least. And I think her story is so indicative of that you can think that you have this vision for your life and you can decide that you were not wrong, but you can change your mind, right? You can change your mind. And that can be really scary, especially if you've invested a lot into the life that you thought you wanted or the decision that you thought was the right one. But don't get caught by the sunk cost fallacy, right? Don't not change something just because you've invested a lot of time into it if it's not the right thing for you anymore. That's easier said than done, especially with something like a marriage and a whole life. But that is one of the things that I love about Sarah's story and about her book, which mirrors her story. And she didn't get remarried. She is now remarried. She didn't get remarried until she was 37. And the way that she talks about what was different the second time around is just something I think you're going to want to hear. And we get into all of it. But before that, this week's media mention. So many of you have sent this to me, and I have been meaning to make this the media mention for this week. And clearly it has sort of taken over the collective consciousness of those on dating apps. This week's media mention is Bumble. They announced via an interview with their CEO, Whitney Wolfe Herd. She went on the Axios show earlier this month, and she announced that they're getting rid of the swipe, which on its own would be okay, other apps don't have a swipe either. Hinge doesn't have a swipe, okay, sure. But the way that she talked about it, she was saying, we're getting rid of the swipe. We're replacing it with something that she called revolutionary. She was pretty vague about what that looked like in that interview. Context here, though. One, Bumble has had a few rough quarters. In just the first quarter of this year, their paid users dropped by 20%. I think it was 21%. They are struggling. So this is very much a pivot driven by a struggling business and not necessarily a product evolution. Doesn't mean that both things can't be true, right? Businesses can make decisions and do make decisions for multiple reasons and have multiple, driving factors behind their decision. But I want to keep that in mind as context setting, because it is very clear that dating apps are, I don't want to say dying, but they've been due for a reckoning for a minute. They've looked the same for a long time. I've talked about this before. Bumble looks the same as it did when I started using it in its beta. 15 years ago. I think it was 15 years ago now, 2011. It looks the same. Granted, different features, it's jazzed up, but at the end of the day, it's the same. So is Tinder. Hinge started different. It looks the same though as when Hinge originally came out. All of these apps look the same. And there hasn't really been something that has been truly disruptive in the space and has succeeded twofold. Has one, been truly disrupted from a user experience perspective and a product perspective, but two, has actually gained traction and gained users in a way that can even come close to rivaling any of those apps. And perhaps it's just because those apps came about in a very different era than now. And it is extremely difficult to gain traction, particularly with Gen Z, with dating apps now. But all of this is context for this announcement that Bumble has made. The other piece of context is that a while back, like a few months ago, not in this same interview, but a few months ago, Bumble announced or mentioned that they are testing an AI assistant that they called B-E-E, like Bumblebee. And what they said is that it was going to interview new users, recommend matches, and do all of this based on artificial intelligence. That is not new. It's new to Bumble. Many apps have tried this before for a while. Like the first one I can remember that was trying to do something like this was in like 2021. And again, none of them have really gained traction. I can't imagine that that is not related to this. And a lot of people made that connection as well, to the point where Bumble actually posted what appeared to be, who knows if it was, a handwritten note from Whitney Wolfe Herd, their CEO, to their story on Instagram. Not a grid post, which I found interesting, to their story, clarifying that they are not, in their words, they are not replacing swiping with AI, that whatever comes next, again, these are their words, is meant to make connecting more intentional, more human, less soulless, and eventually get people offline and onto real dates, which fine. Like that ethos, that goal, cool. I don't think this AI agent thing, if that's what they're doing, is the way to do that. I just don't think the adoption rate is going to be there. When I originally saw this announcement, it was actually via a TikTok video from somebody else. And it was saying that Bumble came out saying that they were going to have AI completely replace people on Bumble, and that you were no longer going to be interacting with people face to face, or it's not face to face, but like you were no longer going to be interacting live with people. And that instead everything was going to go through your like AI avatar. The research that I did does not say that. Like I was like, what the fuck when I saw this video and someone sent it to me. And then I dug into it a little bit more, and I don't think that's true, but they have talked about this bee that would find you matches for you to then talk to human, is what it seems to be. And I still am not sold on it. I don't love AI coming in. I don't like at all, actually, AI coming into the picture in dating. At the same time, though, I very much think that dating apps need to change, need to evolve. I don't know what the answer is. If I did, I would make that app, right? I don't know what the answer is. I don't think it's this. And I don't think this is going to work for Bumble, quite frankly, because the other thing that they announced is that they are dropping the women message first rule. And technically that has been true for a while because they had that like opening move thing where anybody could make an opening move. But beyond that, it sounds like they are fully dropping the women message first rule, with Wolfe Herd said that they won't force one gender to go first. But then she said the spirit of women being in control will live on in some form, which seemed like vague and confusing to me. The swipe thing I can let go of, right? Swipe fatigue is very real. Again, I do not think that an AI agent is the solution to that. I don't know what the solution is, but that doesn't ring right for me. But I genuinely loved that women messaged first on Bumble. I know that not all women agree with that. I know that a lot of women found it to be like one extra piece of labor that they were doing in the dating process. For me, though, it meant that it made it extremely clear who was supposed to message first. There were no games. Like on Hinge, I would be feeling like maybe I needed to play it cool. I don't want to do that. I don't recommend doing that. But I had more of that feeling of, if I was the one to like the person, or if I was the one to send the comment, then what did that say about me? Nothing, for the record, but you've got that little voice inside you, right? Bumble removed all of that. Bumble made it completely cut and dry who was supposed to message first, who had to message first. And so there was no worry that the person on the other end was going to perceive your opening message as too forward, quote unquote, because you have to. Now, on the other side of the coin, you could argue that somebody who perceives your opening message as too forward sucks and you don't want to date that person. But I just really liked the structure of it. Surprise, surprise. I liked the structure of it. I really liked that it removed all questions of what that cadence was going to look like. So I'm very curious. And by the way, it differentiated Bumble, right? Like that was one of their major value propositions when they came out on the market. And so I'm very, very curious what this evolution is going to look like. They are currently being very vague. I have to assume, though, that it involves AI, like I've said. So I'm watching this one closely. I'm watching it closely. Let me know what you think. I'm curious what you all think this next move of theirs is. And they clearly realized via that Instagram story, it's obvious that they realized that people were not happy with their announcement. And a lot of people assumed it was going to be AI related. I think that's obvious. Clearly, they've realized that they fucked up a little bit in that announcement and they're trying to walk it back with that Instagram story. That being said, they're obviously deep in development on something. They wouldn't have announced it as like a new revolutionary thing if they weren't extremely far down the path of executing it. So I doubt that they're going to kill it, but they clearly realized that they are stepping into ground that they weren't considering would be quite fraught. I don't know why they wouldn't have considered that. They've made several missteps like this before, though, so I'm not surprised. I will be watching it closely. I'm very curious, and I would love to hear your thoughts, kind of what you think about all of this. And without further ado, let's get to Sarah. And we are back with Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to Finding Mr. Hyde, the podcast.
Hi, good morning.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's so nice to talk to you, and I miss New York every day. So I'm always happy to see someone in New York.
Maybe not today. It's like 90 degrees.
Yeah, the New York summer. I moved to LA 4 years ago, and I can't do the humidity anymore. Like even after only 4 years, I'm like, I get back there in the summer and I just melt.
It's just very tough, especially in the beginning, because you're like, I'm not used to this. I can't handle this. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
So I'm so excited to talk to you, particularly because talking about New York, in reading your book, it's so much of it just speaks to me about my time being single in New York and kind of finding myself in the city and all of that. And I know that a lot of it is based on your real life experience in doing that. And so, before we kind of dive into everything, I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about that background. Like, you originally were married. Like, how old were you when you got married? Like, what did that life look like before we get to the life in New York and all of that?
Yes. So I grew up in Virginia in a very small town, which was, about 3 hours from DC. So a very provincial part of Virginia. And my dad is from Italy, came over through Ellis Island. He raised us on a farm. We were very, very, suburban wasn't even the right. It was like a very, very small town. It wasn't even really a suburb, right? There wasn't an Olive Garden. We had to go 45 minutes away to find the Olive Garden. I went to college a little bit north of where I grew up in Virginia, still very much like farmlandy. And I moved off campus my second year and I met my soon-to-be husband. And we ended up doing long distance for the rest of the time that I was in college because he moved down to North Carolina. And I graduated college a semester early, moved down to North Carolina to be with him. And then very quickly was like, okay, I see what, I want my life to be. I want to be here. I wanted a family. He came from this really incredibly supportive, loving family. And I had grown up with a bit of a bunch of dysfunction. And so I thought to myself, okay, here's my way of figuring out stability as an adult and growing my own family. And so I very quickly decided that I wanted to get married, and it was my decision. I mean, and he was obviously like, okay, great. But I was the one who, was like, why don't we do this? And I was 21, and that was not uncommon for my friends that grew up in that part of Virginia. Right. But then very quickly I started looking around and I was like, wow, this is young, to have gotten married. And very quickly I started to feel like I had left a lot of life on the table. And career wise, I wasn't really happy with what I was doing. I felt like the marriage had given me this sense of self that I hadn't had before. And so because of that like foundation, I was able to sort of like peep my head out and be like, okay, like what do I actually want for myself professionally, in addition to personally. And had always wanted to be an actor growing up, then became very shy in college and fell in love with independent film and thought that I wanted to be an agent and represent talent. And so I started looking around and I had these opportunities in LA to go work in the mailroom of a talent agency. And it just wasn't the right thing for us personally. He was from North Carolina. He didn't have the same dreams as I did professionally. And so we started kind of like butting up against that of like, okay, well, no, but this is what I think I want to do for my life. And he was like, but that wasn't at all who you were when I married you, like this was never mentioned. And I landed on law school because a lot of agents had gone to law school and gotten their JD. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll go to law school. That's like a totally, like there's many fallback careers in that. If you have a law degree, even if you don't become an agent or you don't do entertainment law, like you can still support yourself and make a living. And he was supportive of law school. And then, we lived apart for 2 summers. My world just got bigger and we quickly grew apart. And by the time I was about to take the bar and after I graduated from law school, we were divorced. So I was 27. So in the book, I have her be just about to turn 30 when she gets divorced. But in reality, it was like, I think I got married at 20, just before I turned 22. And then 26 was when we separated.
I was going to ask, you used the phrase like left a lot of life on the table. I had that thought when you were talking about meeting somebody who was older than college age. So like already out there, I'm going to use the phrase real adult because I think in college it's not quite there yet, right? Like that person almost like pulling you into that life, into adulthood when you're still in college and like figuring out who you are. To me, it makes total sense that who you are changed because that's such a formative time.
But it's interesting because I totally agree. But at that age, when I was in college, I never went to a party, never had even the desire to go to a party, was very much the girl who wanted to go home, cook dinner. I moved off campus right after the first year. So I was I was sort of like inching my way away from a traditional college experience. My roommate and I, we would drive to the Blockbuster at 10 o'clock at night to rent another disc of Sex in the City when we finished. And it was just the two of us. We would cook dinner, watch Sex in the City on DVD, and go to bed, and then do class in the morning. And so I wanted that atypical experience at the time.
Yeah.
Then when I got to law school, and law school was very social. And there were a lot of opportunities to go back and reclaim that experience of college,
right.
Except I was older and married when I started. And so that was also weird. I wasn't going to go to bar review on Thursdays and be the girl, out till 1 a.m. because I was married and I was making dinners and, like continuing that very like traditional domestic, like quiet life. And then I thought, okay, like I want to go back and recreate the experience, and this is like the perfect way to do it. And there was just like a natural growing apart that happened.
Who do you think in that kind of growing apart, was it both of you that kind of realized that was happening? Or is that something that was happening kind of within you more so?
It was definitely one-sided. I talked about this on a podcast a couple weeks ago, like this. I grew up with a mentally ill parent and a very, very traditionally Italian father. And our life from the time I was 7 was very, very unpredictable in many ways. And so I was really gravitating towards stability when I decided to get married at that age. he gave that to me, right? Like he was an incredible person, and he was a wonderful human. He had like a wonderful family. And so the irony was that because he gave me this like sense of self and foundation that I was looking for at that early, like tender age of 20 and 21 and 22, then when I wanted to kind of go back and recreate the experiences that I should have had when I was 18, 19, but I
Right.
was looking for something completely different at the time, he was like, wait, who are you? Like, this isn't what I signed up for at all. And so it was very much one-sided. And there was a lot of guilt that came with that. And there was a lot
Yeah.
of, like feelings, selfishness and ashamed, and like, I bait and switch in terms of, like someone thinking I just wanted to be a wife, and have a family. And then very quickly thereafter, because of those, the formative nature of those years, 21 to 26, like any experience you have is going to open up your world in a way that nothing else will.
Absolutely.
And so it was definitely one-sided. Yeah.
Yeah. And two things can be true, right? Like you can have that formative experience and you have all of the right in the world to be changing and growing and changing what you thought your idea of the life you wanted can look like. Like that can be true. And also it can be true that he's like, oh no, but I still want the life that I thought we had agreed on. And he's confused. Like I get that. And like, no one's like wrong necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think like at that age, it's really hard to have that perspective, right? Like you and I there's just so many things that we're muddling through
Yeah.
emotionally at that age, and taking on marriage is like, forget about it, like especially for someone who's not emotionally mature enough. When you say that, I think the thing that stands out to me is that you and I have life experience,
Yeah.
and different experiences that have given us that perspective. And I think when you're that age, and especially taking on something so weighty as marriage, which if you grow up, I grew up in a very religious, traditional sort of like structure, where it's like you get married, you stay married. And so to have had that, baked in perception of what marriage was supposed to be, and then have it so quickly turn, it was really, it was difficult. And I didn't have the perspective that would have been really helpful for many, many years.
Yeah. What do you think the hardest part was of leaving a relationship that probably looked fine from the outside, right? Like it's something that looks good on paper. There isn't something you can point at to be like, well, this is bad and therefore I'm leaving. Like for you, what was the hardest part of that?
The hardest part was definitely fighting through the feelings of selfishness, right? I think women, especially,
Yeah.
we always want to do the right thing. We don't want to hurt someone. And I didn't know myself well enough to really know that I had to I knew that I had to just barrel through because I knew what the right choice was, but I wish I'd been able to talk myself through it better.
Yeah.
Because really I just felt very, very ashamed. I felt like I had baited and switched, right? I mean, it's just such a, there's so much behind that phrase, but it was true. He if he had married me maybe 5 years later, even, the experience could have been different. I don't know, probably not. Because my life just took like a totally different path. But yeah, it's interesting. It's such a crazy age.
How did you sit with that at the time? Like what made you able to kind of push through those feelings of guilt?
I really did believe that I thought that I knew what would make him happy, and I knew that it wasn't me. I knew that, like pretending to be somebody that I wasn't going to make him happy. It wasn't going to make, he really wanted a family. I had completely, kind of pivoted away from even knowing if I wanted to have children. And so there were like major differences in approaches to, like to what I thought like his version of happy looked like versus my version of happy. And I thought if I stay just because I don't want to hurt him at this juncture, then that's nobody's version of happy. And I did tell myself, I mean, really, like completely just, would repeat to myself over and over like a mantra, he is going to find his person. He is going to find the life that he wants. And he did. But I had to really just sort of like pretend to believe it at the time,
Yeah.
to do it.
I mean, ultimately, I know that the feelings of kind of selfishness are coming up, but ultimately, I think it sounds like you were prioritizing what was best for him as well. Best for both of you. I'm like, that doesn't sound like a selfish decision at all.
Yeah. Again, I don't think I had that perspective though at that point,
Totally.
Yes, now for sure. In hindsight, right? You see it all so much more clearly.
Yeah, always.
But that's the danger of, you know, of young relationships, right? Is that this is an extreme example. It's an extreme example to decide at 20, I want to be married and this is how my life is going to look, especially in our day and age, right? Women, we have careers, everything is pushed later, right? The shifting milestones of adulthood, thankfully, I think are pushing out later and later. And I think that gives us a chance to know ourselves. But to take on something like marriage when you don't know yourself at all and when you're just trying to figure out like who you are, and grasping at things that you think are going to be good for you or that you think are going to be helpful, regardless of what it is, it doesn't have to be as extreme a life choice as getting married at 21. But yeah, it's a very, very difficult thing to navigate at that age.
For sure. So you moved through this, you moved to New York City, you're newly divorced. What was that period actually like for you day to day?
It was very isolating. And that's why I called it a coming of adulthood novel, because it felt like my coming of age years were so far behind me. And I had written this in a Lit Hub piece a few weeks ago, but like there's this like, you get a pass for mistakes when you're like coming of age, right? I was about to turn 30, like I was, late 20s, and it didn't feel charming anymore. It felt like, okay, by now, like you're an adult, like you've been married, you went to law school, you've made this decision to move to New York City, you have this like very intense career that you're embarking on. And you said Good on Paper earlier, which is funny. It's the name of the second. I'm going to write a second one, and I'm calling it Good on Paper. And there's so much about that statement that is like, how do we feel about our lives? I was working, I went to Duke Law School. I was working for one of the top law firms in the country. I was living in New York City in the West Village, in my dream apartment across from like Carrie Bradshaw's like Brownstone. Like on paper, my life was perfect. I was in an absolute emotional train wreck. And I didn't feel like I felt like a fish out of water. And I was kind of embarrassed about the fact that I was divorced, because I was amongst women who obviously had not been married in their 20s, right? Because like they made these decisions to go to law school and like, prioritize career. And I didn't know anybody my age who had gone through what I'd gone through in my 20s and who had even like lived the life I lived in my 20s, this very domestic, traditional, making lunches to pack for my husband to take to work, putting together a home in a suburb of North Carolina, right? Like the way I spent the life I had in my 20s was so completely untethered to the life that I was embarking on that it was almost hard to be like, who am I? And how do I do this when all I knew was this?
Yeah. Was that a major culture shock? It must have been.
It was a major culture shock. I didn't feel like I belonged there as much as I wanted to. There was, we talk about imposter syndrome, but like it was beyond imposter syndrome. It was like, I don't even know what type of like cocktail party conversation to have.
Yeah.
Like it was isolating, and I didn't feel like I had a roadmap of, women who had made these crazy choices, completely fumbled the ball in a way, and then, picked themselves up and started a life that was so completely different.
Do you feel like you had a vision of like the version of yourself that you were building towards in this time?
Yes, absolutely. But my vision was so focused on career.
Yeah.
I felt like the price that I had paid for, for breaking someone's heart, leaving a marriage, getting divorced so early was okay. This was my one chance to get it right. And all I could think about was who was I going to become professionally? And the personal part of it felt unwieldy. I thought, like I was constantly climbing and trying to achieve. And that felt like even though it was really challenging, I was like, okay, I can do this. I kind of know how like this should go. I had no idea how the emotional part of it should go. And so I really veered away from that part of it in my early 30s, and continued to fumble, like I had an interim relationship before I met my now husband, and it just wasn't, I didn't know myself fully. And I was continuing the pattern of looking to a relationship to give me something that only I could give me if I would do the work, but I wasn't ready to do the work. And so I wasn't ready to be in a relationship until I had like accepted that. And, I was 37 when I got remarried. But that entire stretch of my 30s, like I wouldn't have been ready for a relationship.
What did that look like to get to know yourself in this totally new life of yours?
So much therapy. I mean, like so much therapy. My therapist and I have been together since 2012. So
wow.
it's like the longest relationship of my life.
That's a very long-term relationship.
A very long-term relationship. And, ironically, during COVID, we started doing phone sessions. And then when I moved to LA, it was just like we'd been doing phone for 3 years. So, it hasn't even felt like I moved because we've just continued. A lot of therapy. I'm sure the drinking stood out to you. That's one of the things that I found later, and kind of going back and trying to reclaim that experience of collegehood in law school. The social insecurity of, being the only married girl in my 1L class. Anytime there was like a social situation, I was like very uncomfortable. And then when I got to my summer internship, I mean, you hear about the big law, right? It's like the same as like the finance internships. Yep. You're just drinking and, staying out late and getting up early and working hard and doing it all over again. And I found alcohol to be a really incredible way of trying to make myself feel like I could belong in the world. And so it was really a mix of that. I mean, it was therapy with the medication of drinking. And I talk about that a lot in the book because I want to be very forthcoming about that. I want to be forthcoming about how we use alcohol and, the impact, especially for like, lawyers and like, the more high achieving, because it was like such a huge part of my life.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds a lot like what somebody might experience at 18, 19 when they're like a freshman in college and don't kind of know how to navigate those situations. But that wasn't something that you had.
Exactly. It was like being a freshman in college with those experiences, those social experiences, but being 29 and having the perception of obviously, having it all together, being good on paper.
Right.
Again, it's like I said, it's the coming of adulthood because you're just in such a different place emotionally at 29 than you are at 19. And so to be going through the motions of somebody who was 19, it was a lot.
Yeah. How did you kind of contend with that aspect of your life and your relationship with alcohol as you like looked at that? And especially also as you wrote the book, I mean, to write that in there.
Yeah. Well, I started the book in 2013. I started it pretty much, I moved to New York in 2012 and I started writing it almost as like therapy, in addition to my actual therapy. I wanted to write about the experience of a woman getting married, in her 20s and then getting divorced and starting an entirely different life. And so as I was writing it and life was happening to me, obviously my own maturity, my own perspective was changing. I finished it in 2021. So I finished it 8 years later. So it was probably like, it was like 29 to 37, 36. And so much of my life had unfolded during that period of time. And so I was more willing to be vulnerable because I had the perspective. I also felt like the stories that I gravitated towards were of women who were being very vulnerable and honest about their experience of life, right? Like that, the
Yeah,
imperfect,
absolutely.
the sometimes unlikable character because of just the natural evolution of growth as a person, right? Like we do things that are unlikable sometimes to just get through. And I wanted that to be very, I don't think I would have been comfortable when I started writing it. I definitely wasn't comfortable enough in my own skin when I started writing the book to be that vulnerable. But because there was such a long gestation period and
Yeah.
I had lived so much life, I mean, I think even more, it was like on hyper speed because I'd gone back, and like tried to like recreate certain experiences. And there was just like, it was a very intense period of time. And I wrote it as it all unfolded. And I wanted to depict that kind of emotional survivalism of, what we do as we're growing, as we're going through the growing pains, the people that we hurt as we're growing, the mistakes that we make, the ways that we stumble. Because I was able to look back and be kinder to myself as an older, slightly more formed person, as I was finishing it. And I was able to go back and say, okay, like I want to make her way more three-dimensional. I want to make her way more relatable to women, especially women in their 20s and early 30s who are maybe going through some version of that self-discovery.
Yeah, it's interesting concept to think about, going almost like editing your own past self. Like that's such an interesting concept to me, especially with all of the growth that you did across the course of the writing process. And then therefore looking back at the things that you maybe wrote in the beginning, like that's really cool, I think, to have that opportunity.
I mean, I sold the book out of nowhere when I was 40. There was a 4-year period. I finished it in 2021. I had started querying agents. I'd gotten some really nice responses, but nothing had stuck. And then I got pregnant, got married, moved across the country and started a new job all within the span of like 3 months. And
Oh,
I
wow.
just put it down and thought, I'll revisit this when life allows. And 4 years later, somebody who had read it as a friend early on was like, did you ever sell your book? Because I'm an editor now and I think about it all the time. And I think my colleague would really
Oh,
love it. And it just happened overnight. And so to have started the book like right before I was 30, I was 40 when I sold it. And then I went through like about a 6-month editorial process with the
yeah.
publisher. That in particular was amazing to have had the 4-year period of time that I hadn't even looked at it, hadn't even read any portion of it, in 4 years. And then I was a mother and living in LA and, a completely different life. To go back like that long and edit a manuscript that I started when I was a completely different person was really incredible. It felt like my own coming of adulthood, like moment, my mini
Yeah.
moment. Truly.
It's all coming, like it all comes full circle in that sense.
Yeah. In the craziest way.
Yeah. So having that perspective that you had and having been able to go back and kind of edit your past self, if you will, like what do you hope that women in their late 20s, early 30s, like in that era, take from Sam's story and the perspective that you have now?
I think self-compassion. I think more comfortability with the idea of what would traditionally be considered to be selfish, right? I mean, women are not supposed to leave marriages. We're not supposed to prioritize career over family. I mean, these are long-standing, myths that we are all contending with because of the
Yeah.
way we grew up and, because of the way just the way life has been. I didn't realize this obviously at the time because I thought I was writing it for me as, as therapy to kind of process and work through my feelings about everything that I'd gone through in my 20s. But what I realized, having written it over such a long period of time, was that, at 40, now having put out a book, 41, I was writing it, or I was, I ended up writing it for women in their late 20s, early 30s, who maybe feel like adulthood should look different, or, we have these preconceived notions of like what it's going to be like. And when it doesn't either pan out that way, or when we do make mistakes that like put us on a different path, it's very difficult, I think, for women to be kind to ourselves and to just say like, okay, well, I'm at this place in life where I don't have all the tools to really be exactly where I want to be. Right. And so what I would love for it to do, and what I talk a lot about when I talk about the book, is like this reframing of what growth looks like, especially for the modern woman, right? Like, there's these like ideas of where we should be by a certain time. And they're very, very like tied to relationship and career and motherhood. And those are sort of like the pillars that we're all like, like all the decisions that we're making in some ways revolve around one of those three things, I think. And especially today, it's just very, very difficult for it to look like exactly what we think it should look like. And so having that self-compassion, reframing what we would think would be selfish decisions into, like you said, it's almost like self-care, right? Instead of selfish, it's self-care. Because we're not going to be the people we're not going to be the friends that we want to be. We're not going to be the partners that we would hope to be. I certainly could not have been a mother any earlier than I became a mother. Because there was so much that I had to figure out and, to get to that point.
And I'm also curious, so you're remarried and, met your partner, it sounds like late 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah. What did that feel like in comparison to when you think about your first marriage and, you described it as like looking for that stability because you didn't have that within yourself? Like what did that now feel like on the other side of that?
I felt very happy with the idea that I might never be remarried, and that, and motherhood was not like it wasn't if I don't become a mother, my life will have gone terribly wrong. Right.
Yeah.
It all felt very much like a relationship, a child. Everything was going to be additive to the foundation that I had built personally at that point.
Yeah.
I had focused so much on my career. I had achieved a lot of the things that I'd set out to do. So professionally, my identity felt secure. And that was just something I had to always be very honest about, like, because when I was married in my 20s and I was weighing, like, do I stay or do I go? Staying would have foreclosed a lot of the dreams that I thought I wanted to pursue. Right. And I say this all the time. It's like, we can't, you can tell anyone anything. You can't tell yourself something that isn't true. You can't convince yourself that you're not happy, that you're happy when you're not happy. My biggest fear is being disappointed in myself, because we can't run away from that, right? Like, we can't lie to ourselves. And so I knew that there was just this side of me that had to feel like I had done what I wanted to do as a person, as a career woman. And until that felt secure, I wasn't going to be a partner in the way that I knew I should be, in the giving way, right? In the way of like, I'm not looking to someone to give me stability or to give me happiness or satisfaction or intrinsic, whatever. But I want it to be a true give and take of like, what can I give to this person? What can this person, like, give back? And And I wasn't ready until my career felt baked, and I felt like I had spent enough time thinking about who I was, what I wanted from a relationship, and how a relationship was going to be additive and not the central part of what I was looking for happiness.
Were those conversations that you had with your now husband about like what your vision of a relationship was? Like, if I'm going to be in one, like, this is what I want it to look like for me?
Yes, very much so. Because and again, I mean, children, it feels like such a, I don't know, like, I feel like your listeners are probably like, oh, kids, like, who even thinks about it? And like, because I didn't think about kids for a long time, but when I was ready to be in a relationship and I knew that this was the person that I wanted to be with, and I knew that this person was meant to be a father, right? Like, it just was clear. I mean, he was going to be, the most amazing parent in a way that made me then want to think, I wonder if I could be like a good parent.
Yeah.
But we had these conversations of like, I don't want to be like, I knew I would not want to stop working, obviously, not like, women have to anymore, but like, but I wanted to be able to continue to pursue my career in the way that I had. And so I wanted a partner who felt like parenthood for them was almost like more important than career. And my husband is like, an incredibly successful entertainment lawyer. He incredible in his career.
Yeah.
But he is a dad. And he loves spending time with our son in a way that sometimes I have, less capacity. And so I was very clear up front going in, knowing that I was in my mid-30s. And if we were going to be together and like make the decision to have kids, our parenting styles needed to balance each other out.
Yeah.
And they really, really have. And I say to women all the time, that is one of the most important decisions that I made when I was thinking about a partner. And I do hope now that we're, like that this is my person, that this is, I mean, he is my person, but like, I never ever would imagine getting divorced after having a child. That just to me is like, that's important to me, and people do it and they do it for the right reasons. But because I did it later, I got married later and I've already been divorced. I knew that almost the decision to have a child with someone was more important than the decision to get remarried. Right. Like that was the more like solidifying thing for me. And being able to continue to do the things that I know I have to do to make myself, to be happy as a person, to then be able to give of myself to my partner, to my child. I needed a partner that was going to be able to balance that out and, not expect me to be home every single night, to be like happy with me, like going out and doing and continuing to do the things that make me who I am.
Absolutely. So I think overall, as you think back on your journey and like when you were in like the thick of it, is there anything that you wish someone had told you when you were like really in it that maybe somebody listening who's feeling a similar way can hold on to?
I always go back to this quote that I hung on to. I think I even had it on a magnet when I was married the first time, and I've had it in some way like around me ever since. So probably for the last 20 years. It's this Rainer Maria Rilke quote that you have to love the questions that you have as if they were like tiny, secrets that you're trying to uncover, and that the whole point is not to know the answers to everything right now. The whole point is to live your way into the answers to these like precious questions that we have, as to like, who am I going to be? Who do I want to be? Who is my partner going to be? What is my life going to look like? These are all questions that we have to live our way into the answer for. And I think, especially today, like the modern, there's instant gratification, right? Like we can like, we have a problem, we can go find something online for it, right? Like, and figure out like, or we have these incredible resources we can look to. Sometimes it really just is about living life and living your way into the answers to those questions, because I wouldn't have even been able to live the answers at that point,
Right.
like I had to experience life in the way that I had to go through it to be ready for all of it. So love the questions themselves, guard them, and, know that the most important thing is living your way into the answers and having that perspective that only comes from time and experience, and not being afraid to make the mistakes, right? Like, don't be afraid to have the relationship that might not work out. Don't be afraid to take the job that, seems like it's going to be the greatest job ever and somehow like isn't. And you have to pivot, right? It's that fear of failure, I think, that holds us back, whether it's relationship or career. And just knowing that every single one of those choices that you're making, you're supposed to have made that choice at that point in time, because you're going to learn something from it, and it's going to like shape your life beyond, like, in a way that nothing else can other than living it.
Yeah. I like to say that very few decisions are irreversible. Like the job example you gave, like, yeah, is it ideal if you start a job and absolutely hate it and want to leave immediately? Of course not, but you can.
Yes.
You can.
And you should.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and you absolutely should. And then that will only set you up for success in the next decision that you make, because these are data points that you can't manufacture. You can't go to Reddit for the data points. Like, you have to live it yourself, because it's going to be so specific to you.
So true. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and your journey with our listeners. Where can they find you and your book?
So my book is everywhere. It's online, on Amazon, or hopefully your independent bookstore can order it. Bookshop.org is a great place for that too. And then my website is sarahvacchiano.com, and you can keep up with what I'm writing. I'm writing a follow-up to Soft Launch right now, and I'm also writing another book that is completely different. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you again. And to the listeners, we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you so much. It was so good to meet you.
You too.